you ever wanted to try free motion quilting? Well, I'm going to show you 3 designs to get started. Hi, it's Fran Morgan with Fabric Cafe. I know a lot of you have expressed interest in learning a little bit more about free motion quilting. So today we wanted to take some time and share some things with you that I've learned about free motion quilting through the years. Now, way back when Fabric Cafe first started, and we first started designing quilt patterns and making them, I actually free motion quilted everything. So I would get on my machine and I would learn and I would do different techniques. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I learned and some of my favorite designs that are great to get started with. So the first one we're going to share with you is the meander design. And you can see that here. It's just a meander pattern all over. Very fun to do. The second pattern that we're going to work with is our loop design, which is also kind of fun and really great when you have a little bit more of a whimsical pattern on your quilt. The third one is going to be the swirl, as you see on this side, and this one is a really fun one to fill in, and we're going to go through all of these. So let's get started. Free motion quilting is a little different than like quilting in the ditch or something like that. When you quilt in the ditch, you're actually following a seam and your lower feed dogs are engaged, so it helps to feed the layers of fabric through your machine. When we're doing free motion quilting, we drop the feed dogs so that they're not engaged and they're not feeding the material through the machine. So you have your 3 layers of materials, your quilt sandwich, and it actually moves freely underneath the needle. So that's a little bit different on like quilting in the ditch and regular quilting as opposed to free motion where the feed dogs are not engaged and the fabric can move freely. All right, now let's talk about the list of supplies that we're going to need. You're going to need a sewing machine. You're going to need a closed-toed foot, or if you have a stitch regulator on your machine, thread, quilting gloves, curved safety pins, sewing needles, batting, and backing. Your sewing machine is going to need to be able to drop the feed dogs and disengage those. Most machines that can be done, so you're probably good there. The second thing you're going to need is a closed-toed foot. Now, I have one here, and the reason why I like to use a closed-toed foot whenever I'm free motion quilting, one, they usually have a little spring on them, okay, so that foot can kind of move with your quilt sandwich. It is absolutely closed with an open area in the center. The reason why this is beneficial is because that way the foot is not catching on any safety pins, any bumps in your quilt sandwich, anything like that. It can float freely over the surface of your quilt. Now, also, I know this is from long ago, these are also referred to as darning feet. So that was something else that if you have a darning foot on your machine, that might work as well. My particular machine has a stitch regulator on it, and you're going to see this in a little bit later. It has this same style of foot, except for I actually have some regulation that my machine can help with the stitch length. So we'll get into that more later. All right, the next thing you're going to need is thread. Now, my machine does not like having quilt weight thread in the top and bottom. I just don't think it acts as nice. So I usually use a regular sewing thread that is polyester. I know that that's crazy, but that's what I do. There's not a lot of stress, and that polyester is a super strong thread. Now, often I will use an invisible thread. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about invisible thread because I have some very specific preferences. This spool is a little bit bigger. We don't want to go with one of the little spools on invisible thread. Sulky is my preferred brand. I do not like the other brands, or maybe I should say my machine doesn't like the other brands. And this bigger spool does not tend to tangle as much because it has a bigger wrap around the spool. Not such a small tight wrap, it doesn't tangle and loop the same way. And I have actually used this in both my bobbin and my top thread, and I would recommend this if you're not quite sure what thread color to use. But either works fine, either a nice strong polyester or an invisible. Now, the next thing I like to use are quilting gloves. Now, a little story with my gloves here. These are regular running gloves. I used to run all the time, loved it. And then, I was quilting then too. And whenever I learned about quilting gloves and why they're so great, I realized that my running gloves had this too. So a great pair of free motion quilting gloves will have a little bit of a rubber little part on the palm section of the glove. And what these little rubber parts do is it helps you grip your quilt as you're freely moving it. And as I said, my running gloves have worked great for that. I've used these for years and I'm not running anymore, so they get a lot of use in my quilt room. The next thing we're gonna need are safety pins. Now, I prefer to use a bent safety pin just because I think that they're easier to work with, easier to use, and you can really get it through all 3 layers of your quilt sandwich. Very easy, very common. You're then gonna need just regular sewing needles. The reason why you're gonna need these is to pull those long threads, tie them off, and embed them in the quilt sandwich. That's gonna be really great for that. But we can't forget, we're also gonna need batting. Now, for me, whenever I free motion quilt, I prefer a lower loft batting. I also prefer 100% batting. So there's a lot out there, get what you prefer. I have learned that with free motion quilting, the lighter batting, the thinner batting actually is a lot easier to work with. And then of course you're gonna need your backing fabric. So that of course is your choice, whether you go 108 and cut it down or you use wonderful 44-inch wide fabric and sew it together. Either works perfectly. Okay, so I have put together a little sampling here from the City Lights quilt. And I really like this quilt pattern because it gives you a nice big block so that we can really feature a great fabric. And in this case, we have this wonderful kind of modern looking circles with a hint of squares in the background, and then our 4 patches put together in a block as a 4 patch, which is really cool. So I really like this kind of modern fabric here. This is very much my aesthetic. So what I decided to do was use the meander pattern for this. So that is this middle one here. And this pattern just kind of makes some roundy little traveling motions, almost like you're just meandering. And that's exactly what we're gonna put on here. Now I like this because I think it's gonna show up really well in the lighter sections as well as the dark sections and mimic this really modern style. Whenever I'm working with this particular combination of colors, I think I would recommend going with a gray thread. Now this gray thread really picks up the darker shades in my very lightest fabric, but I also think it's going to look great whenever I put it on the modern kind of fabric here. I think this is a nice medium because I have lights and darks. Often I go very medium. Now on this one, I would also match my bobbin thread just so that it's very cohesive throughout. So next we need to make our quilt sandwich when you're doing your quilts. So we're gonna set our thread aside over here. Now what I have done here, and of course you would have your big quilt. This is just a sampling so that you can see what I'm doing. I have my quilt top, face up of course. Then I have my batting. Now this is my favorite batting, the Warm and Natural. It's 100% cotton batting and it's a very low loft. I have cut it 3 inches larger on each side so that I have plenty of extra space to work, and I know that if it shifts at all, I've got plenty. I've also put my batting fabric here, and let's just fold this over so that you can see. My backing that I'm using is also cut 3 inches larger. It is right side facing down. So all my wrong sides are in the middle. They're all sandwiched there. All nice and clean. Now remember, if you're prepping your quilt for a long arm, it's a little bit different, so be sure and kind of think about that whenever you're doing this. Next, we're gonna pin our sandwich together. Now whenever I pin, like I mentioned, I like to use the curved safety pins. And these curved pins, as you can see, they have a little bumpity bump in there so that it helps you grab your sandwich better. Couple of rules whenever I pin for free motion quilting. I like to always do it on a joint of a seam, so you've got this block and this block, so I pin this joint here. And then of course I'm gonna pin in this joint here. About 6 inches apart is what I prefer to do because I would rather stop and pull extra pins out than to have my quilt sandwich shift while I'm quilting. Now another tip to remember when you're pinning your quilt sandwich, make sure that your quilt is placed on top of something with your self-adhesive mat under it. You wouldn't want to poke this pin down on your nice dining room table and cause a scratch. And then we're just going to clip these together here, and you can see these are about 6 inches apart. I'm also going to go around the edges, make sure you have a pin at each corner on the seam of the edge here. I would probably also go back, like I said, about every 6 inches, put one here, and go all the way around the edge. Now it's time to start working with our free motion quilting design. If you have never free motion quilted before, it's really a good idea to practice with a piece of paper and a pen, just so that it helps your brain understand how the pattern goes. So what I would do, just a scrap paper and a pen, and you're gonna just do the motion around and learn how that you make these little gaps, and then you go around and you fill a hole and that kind of thing. So I think this is a really important step so that you really kind of have a feel for what you're trying to do. Oh, make sure that whenever you're practicing this, don't work yourself into a hole. So for instance, if I went here and maybe I can't get back out. It's kind of like a maze. You want to make sure that you always have a way out. If you find yourself in that position, it's okay, but practice this so that you understand the motion of the meander. I like those rounded corners. I don't like them whenever they get what I call too wormy. So for instance, let's draw a wormy one. So I don't like it whenever it gets too like long parts like that. I like it to be more curvy. Personal preference, so practice and have fun with it. So we're at our machine and we're ready to start free motion quilting. And we're gonna start with our meander pattern. But before we get going, there is a few things that I just want to go over before we begin. The paper is our quilt sandwich and our pen is the needle on the machine. So instead of moving your pen to make the design, we are going to be moving the paper or quilt sandwich. I always do a practice square first. I want to make sure that I have a good feel of what I'm doing, everything is running smoothly, and I'm loose and ready to go. I have my gloves on, and remember these are my running gloves, but they have those little rubber spots on them. So quilting gloves are available and they're great. I highly recommend them. I have lowered my feed dogs on my machine because we do want our fabric sandwich to float and we don't want those feed dogs to be grabbing the fabric. So those are lowered. I do have a closed toe foot on my machine. Now mine is connected to the stitch regulator. You do not have to have a stitch regulator, it's just something special I bought for myself. When you're doing free motion quilting, there is a foot, hand, eye coordination that you're working with. If you are moving your fabric too fast in the motion and you have not pressed your gas pedal hard enough, then your fabric's gonna move and your needle is not, and it could break a needle. Or vice versa, if your fabric is moving too slow and you're sewing too much in the same spot, then it could create a hole in your fabric. So you don't want that. Now these are just words of warning, okay? Do that practice swatch and you'll get it. Remember, and my good friend Charity says this all the time, and I'm gonna repeat it here. Practice makes progress, and that's what we want here. We're not looking for perfection, so continue to practice. I always start on an edge, halfway on an edge on a quilt. So I section my quilt off into quarters, and I do 1 quarter at a time. So I start in the middle, and then I'm going to do this whole quarter, and then I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to rest a little bit, and then I'll come back later and do another quarter, and so on. One of the things with free motion quilting is it can really stress kind of your shoulders up in here and your neck. You need to stay relaxed when you do this because as you go, I know I do, I tend to like tense up like this, and then my stitches are jerky and they're not as smooth as I want them to be. So it's nice just to rest, and quartering your quilt is a great way to work that rest in, get up, move around, and stretch. All right, so I'm at the center here. I'm going to tap my foot so that it lowers my presser foot, and then I'm gonna make sure that my needle is landing in the quilt sandwich, so it's in the down position. This way, if I need to stop and reposition my hands, my needle is holding my place for me, and I'm not going to have any awkward jumps in my thread or anything like that. So I'm right in the middle. This is the quarter I'm going to be working on. There's a pin here, so I'm going to tap and put my needle in the down position, and I'm going to remove this safety pin so that I don't accidentally sew over it, because we don't want to do that. We're going to start. I'm going to get a nice casual easy grip on my sandwich, and I'm going to start moving. We're just going to do those little curly cues for our meander, and you can see it's just a very smooth flowing, whoop, my machine decided it wanted to stop, didn't it? And you can see how being relaxed is very, very important whenever you do this. The other thing is, don't be too critical. You're going to see this as a big picture once you get your quilt finished, and you're not going to see each little bitty curve. You're only going to see a little bit. Okay, if I'm ready to stop and take a break, I sew to the edge so that I can then cut my thread and pull it out. And this will be covered up whenever I do my binding stitches and everything. So there's no need to tie off when you stop at your edge. So now let's look at the fabric that's in this great pattern, City Lights. We've got an image on the screen for you. You can see this fun kind of modern print in the blues and the pinks and the greens, and it just really looks great with our mottled gray and our black little stones there, little squares that travel across the surface. It's really a lot of fun. And once you get it together, I'm using a dark charcoal color of thread here, or even that light gray that I mentioned earlier. It's going to look great if you choose to practice your free motion quilting. The name of this kit is Art Loft, and the name of the pattern is City Lights from the book Fast and Fun 3-Yard Quilts. So our next free motion quilting design that we're going to work on is called loops. Now I've named these are things that I have done, and I just call this loops because it's kind of a combination of a loop and a meander. So let's look at our quilt sample here. Now I have put together a sample from our Sew Quick pattern, and I've got a 4-patch here, a nice big block here with some really beautiful colors. And I thought the loop pattern would work really good on this because to me it kind of looks like it's in outer space or something. And we have lots of loops and curls on our fabric, which is really cool. Now the other thing that I decided on this one is to use a navy thread. Now partly, check your stash and see what you have. I have plenty of this navy thread. I thought this navy would look really good on the darker parts, pop really nice on the purple parts, and on our off-white here, so I really think it's going to look really super good. Just like before, we are going to practice our pattern on a piece of paper, and we're going to look at our loop design again. Now, remember I said this is kind of a combination of the meander and the loop. I like the loops. It's really fun to do whenever you're sewing, and on paper it's the same basic thing. So let's get it in our brain so our brain understands the movement. So we're going to start on an edge, and we're going to just do loops, and then we can come up here and do a loop and do a loop. And it's basically, like I said, it's just a meander stitch with a loop thrown in. And whenever I'm doing this on the machine, as you're going to see in a minute, I kind of just go and fill in. I don't try to make the loops like spaced apart or anything like that. I just go and fill the holes. I make a hole and then I fill a hole. And the loops can go either direction, and it just is kind of fun and carefree. We're starting at the edge just like always. We're going to put our needle in the down position, and once again we're going to lightly hold on to our fabric and we're going to go. So just very slowly, carefully. And I really, really like this pattern. I think it's one of my favorites to do because it's kind of like one of those things where you can do as many or as few loops as you want to. And it's just really, I don't know, it's just kind of soothing to go. We're not trying to fill anything necessarily, and it's just kind of meandering all over, and it's very fun. I really, really enjoy it. I think free motion quilting is almost meditative because you kind of get in the groove and you're trying to relax and just enjoy it and have a really, really good time. All right, I'm going to stop right here. As you can see, we have lots of loops going and they're really lots of fun. Now, a couple of little tips if you have to stop. Remember, never leave your quilt sandwich parked in your machine. The other thing is if you just need to stop to kind of readjust yourself or get a different grip, always, always, always take your foot off of the pedal because we don't want to accidentally have that pedal jump or get you or anything. So that's something I always get in the habit of doing on all of my sewing projects is to take my foot off. Okay, remember how we talked about we always start on the edge? Well, that's so that when you sew your binding on, it's going to catch that thread on the edge. But what happens if you run out of bobbin thread and you're in the middle of a square? Oh my goodness, that's happened to me so many times. Or let's say it just makes spaghetti, which also has a tendency to happen on occasion, and you need to pull it out of your machine. Now, let's just go ahead and stop where we are. I'm going to lift the needle, and we're going to pretend like we have to start over again and pull it out of our machine. So I'm going to lift my presser foot here, and I'm going to pull, and I'm going to leave a really long thread. All right, and remember my foot is off the gas pedal so that this won't budge here. All right, I have to take my gloves off to do this. Okay, so I've got a long thread on top, and under here I also have a really long thread. What I'm going to do is I am going to kind of pull on the bobbin thread on the back side, and what that does is it gives me just a little bit of a loop. Now, if you did not have a long thread on top because your thread broke, this might be a little bit easier to pull through. I'm going to use the back side of my seam ripper. This is one of the ways that I use it to kind of catch that bobbin thread so that I can pull both the top thread and the bobbin to the back side. It is very slowly coming. There it is. All right, so now I have 2 threads on the top. This is my top thread and my bobbin thread. And you can see now that there is nothing here. All right, so we've pulled those through to the back. I'm going to take these long threads and I'm just going to tie a knot, just a couple of overhand knots. And then I'm going to thread this in between my layers. Now I'm just going to use just a sharp that I have that I use for binding and different things. I'm going to thread both ends through the needle. So I have both threads through the needle, and then I'm going to run it in between the layers. So we're not going to the surface at all, and I'm just running it in between the layers, and I'm going to try to go through some stitches there just to help anchor it, and then I'm going to pull it. So I did that about 1.5 inches, and I'm going to pull just a little bit and give it a trim and then let that fall between the layers. So it's really simple to do. Now whenever I start again and I'm quilting, I'm going to position my machine so that I start right where I left off. I'm going to leave a long thread just like I did whenever I finished. I'm going to sew a little bit, and whenever I can work myself to the edge, I'm going to go ahead and pull it out and tie those off the exact same way. All right, now this beautiful fabric in this pattern, so quick. I love this purple. It just has all of this great metallic kind of print on it. And then this is just speckled with metallic. It's so pretty. It's really gorgeous. The name of this kit is Cosmos. The name of the pattern is So Quick, and it's from the book Quilt Favorites. We've been meandering, lots of fun. We've been looping. Now we're gonna swirl. So I have a sample here of a quilt as always, and we have got it all pinned together with our batting and our backing in place. Of course, we've got our pins on our edge and at our seams. And the next thing is we want to identify what thread color we are going to be using on our Brick Street sample here. So first, I think this is so cute. So this is my thread that I have chosen for this, but I want to show you these cute little thread huggers that we have. These little guys just wrap around your thread so that the threads don't come all unraveled in your sewing kit, and it makes it so nice and handy. They come in these a little package here. We have several in here. There's 8 with all these fun colors, and these are available on our website. So this is going to keep it tidy, so I'm just going to slip off my hugger here and look at this thread. So once again, I am just using a polyester thread, and I chose this nice beige color because I think that it blends really well with the background. I love the way it pops off of my 2 focus fabrics here, this red as well as the white, and I think it's going to work really cool. The other thing is with our swirl design, I think it's going to be really perfect. So in this case, once again, I kind of went with the mid-tone of my thread, and not the dark red, not the white, but right in the middle. So the design here that we're going to be working with is the swirl. And just like before, if you have not done this design before, what we need to do is kind of practice on a piece of paper, or really practice and figure this out. With the swirl pattern, it takes just a little bit more thought than the meander or the loop, but you can do it. It's not hard. So as always, we always start at the edge of our quilt, and in this case, the edge of our paper. You're going to go and you're going to make a big swirl, but in this case, you're going to make the swirl bigger than you think, and then you're going to come back around and fill it in. Now you can go all the way to the back, or you can do it right here next to it. But don't forget, when you're doing this pattern, that you'll make your swirl larger than you think, and then you're going to come back through and kind of backtrack on your swirl. So this is kind of the motion and the patterning that I do whenever I do this pattern. Practicing on a piece of paper helps so much because it gives you an idea of how your needle is going to travel, how your brain needs to work, and really practice making those swirls and then coming back out of it and looping around. So this is an important step. Don't skip this one. All right, let's go check this out on our machine. Just like the other ones, we're going to start in the middle, and I'm going to lower my foot and put my needle in the down position and pull that first pin. Okay, so you see how I made a bigger swirl and went to the middle, and then I worked my way back out. So I'm doing the next one now, and then I'm going to turn and work my way out. And then here's another great big one, and then I go back around just like this. And then I'm going to do a little one, and then I'm going to go way over here, do another big one, and work my way out. Okay, now when you're quilting, I know we've mentioned before that you need to take some breaks and you need to get up and stretch and things like that, which I think is very important. So when you take a break and you get up to do that, if you're not on the edge of your quilt, make sure that you go ahead and lift your needle out of the quilt and pull it out. I think it's very important not to leave the quilt with your needle in the down position. You don't want anything to accidentally happen or you not get back to it and that be parked in your quilt, just to make sure that there's no damage there. Now the other thing when you take a break, I think it's really important to get up, do some shoulder rolls, both direction, maybe some arm circles or something like that. You could even very gently just kind of stretch and pull down here and just and stretch this right here and then on the other side. I think all of this will help keep you loose, and it will help to keep your stitches very flowing and very natural. So I'm going to go ahead and make a few more swirls. I'm going to work my way to the edge so that I can stop. Okay, this is such a fun bunch of fabric in this kit here. Now this is our Brick Street pattern, and it's almost acting like a double focus because we have our cactus in our white background and in our red background. It is so much fun. You can see the image there on the screen and how well it goes together. And I just love this swirl free motion on it as well. Kit information on this one, it is called Adobe Garden. And once again, it's our Brick Street pattern from our Fast and Fun book. So I hope that this video has inspired you to try free motion quilting if you haven't tried it before. And if you have tried it before, I hope you picked up some good tips that you can apply to your next quilt. Now, if you're just a little bit intimidated to try free motion quilting, not sure if you want to do this, we also have another great video on 3 methods to try without a long arm. So be sure and check out that video too. All right, it's Fran Morgan with Fabric Cafe. You can do this. Let's go free motion quilt.